Hello, and thanks for joining me. So, what is the law of life? That's the chapter title for chapter 26 of book 1 of the Discourses by Epictetus. If you haven't seen any of my other Being Stoic videos, what I'm doing is I'm going chapter by chapter through the Discourses and just sort of giving an overview of my takeaways from the discourse, as well as, applications to life and my life in general. Epictetus starts off this discourse talking about there's the law of hypothesis, which is the law I interpret it as like the law of knowledge, and then there's a more important law, which is the law of life, or really I interpret this to mean like the art of living, and he's saying that I think that. To the sort of the foundational, one of the foundational ideas of Stoicism is living in balance. Living a good life is living within balance of yourself. So living in balance with your society, with your within your means, your financial means. Living in harmony, really, with yourself. This sort of sense of inner tranquility, recognizing, as we've discussed in previous videos, things that are in your control versus things that are outside of your control, and really focusing your energy and attention on those things that are in your control. So these various Stoic ideas that we've discussed before, all pertain to living a good life. But he's saying that the knowledge part, the law of hypothesis part, is actually the more difficult. The easiest thing to do. Which is, a lot of what we spend our time on, actually, me personally in my reading and whatnot. But that, the real challenge then comes in applying that to the law of life, to the law of living, to living a good life. And, he uses this discourse, he says, using this idea of getting knowledge first, though you need to, he's saying that, a person needs to gain the knowledge then in order to be able to apply it to one's life. And he says this is a good argument to use for parents who do not want to send their children off to philosophy schools. And because they're afraid, I think a lot of times of what ideas that children will get exposed to, and what dangers there are in that. And granted, there are some, but they use this hypothetical student that says to his parent, before I can have a good life, don't you want me to have a good life? Do you want me to keep making mistakes and be in ignorance? If you don't, then teach me, and I'll learn, what I can. If it's not learnable by me because of my own abilities, then okay. But, I should be able to learn, what I can. Don't you trust me to know don't you trust me enough to know me well enough to say that, I wouldn't purposely go off into error and mistakes and wrong thinking. But that unless I, actually embrace knowledge, then I will always remain in ignorance, and don't you, mom and dad, want me to not be ignorant? So he sort of uses that example. He does talk about knowledge in this sense of being able to apply it to a good life and be able to make good decisions and better decisions, and to be able to I think live in better harmony with yourself and others. Using knowledge in that sense of the art of living and the art of a good life, as opposed to knowledge just for knowledge's sake itself, which he uses the instance of a person who just wants to be able to spout quotes at dinner parties and things like that. So that's sort of I'm taking away as a sort of a misuse of knowledge, meaning it's not being applied in any kind of real way. So so they talk about a person. It's more difficult, the more difficult thing is art of living, not gathering knowledge, as I said. So, but a person sometimes is either thrown into, I guess, living, making decisions, or thinks they have knowledge, or maybe someone has. Is saying he gives the instance of like a master and pupil, and the master is just giving this pupil, I guess, something to read that he can't digest, like a difficult treatise. If he hasn't learned the background to some sort of difficult work, then, he's never going to understand and comprehend a difficult work if someone gave it to him. He needs to work up, to that point. And I think that what Epictetus is trying to say in this section is to try to say, the same thing goes for living. You don't just tackle it without some sort of effort at it. Living a good life, in other words, requires effort. It requires thought, and it requires exercise, and it requires input. And I think this is a Stoic idea, that I've seen in other discourses and in other Stoic writings that I've read, and that's sort of what I took away from that. There's a quote at the very end here that says that I thought I would read directly from the discourse, and it says, "This then is where the philosophic life begins, in the discovery of the true state of one's own mind. For when once you realize that it is in a feeble state, you will not choose to employ it any more for great matters." So this is, he's saying that, I'm interpreting this to mean, that the philosophic life begins, when you look inside your own mind and you realize that, you realize your weaknesses, you realize where you're weak in your knowledge and in your living areas, and then, that's that journey seeking out then to gain knowledge and to gain wisdom, we could say, is really the true philosophic life as he mentions here. I had mentioned in previous videos, Stoicism, in the ancient times, philosophy was concerned with, how to live a good life. And so I think that's how I interpret this last part of the discourses. The philosophic life, meaning the art of living a good life, begins with, recognizing that what a feeble state that your mind starts out in, and then trying to build that, as time goes on. So I will leave it at that. The next discourse, chapter 27, is called "On the Ways in Which Impressions Come to Us, and the Aids We Must Provide for Ourselves to Deal with Them." So this Stoic idea of impressions I've read a little bit about in the past, so I'll read through this discourse and have a chat on it coming up fairly soon. So until next time, take care. Bye.